We're in Denver, Colorado at the annual meeting of the Health Physics Society, and to participate in this interviewing of senior health physicists that have made contributions to radiation safety in the U.S. And so it's my privilege to, both as a friend and colleague of Dr. Ken Mossman, to conduct this interview of one of the outstanding health physicists in the United States and as well in the international arena. So Ken, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. Nice to be here.
It's, as I say, both it's a privilege for me as a friend and colleague who I have the greatest respect for. Tell us a little bit about your early childhood, your early interest in science, and where you picked up on this interest and started your career in this field where you've made such a contribution.
I was born in Windsor, Ontario, Canada in 1946. And Windsor is a border town. It's across the river from Detroit, Michigan. And my early years, I have two brothers and my mom and dad, and my father owned a kosher delicatessen in Windsor, and he worked very, very hard, and I suppose I got my work ethic from him. He would work 6 days a week, 12, 14 hours a day, and didn't bring home a lot of money, but he instilled in us very, very important values, a work ethic that stayed with me and my brothers for our entire lives. Both of my brothers now are attorneys. One is an attorney in Windsor, and the other is an attorney in Nashville, Tennessee. I always had an interest in science. I was a very curious young child. In fact, my eyesight was never been good, and I would go to the ophthalmologist on a regular basis, and they would put these fancy instruments in front of my eyes, and they would leave the room to go do something, and I would sit there tweaking all of the knobs and dials and completely upset the settings and make a holy mess. And I was just curious about how this little instrument worked. I had no idea what the doctor was doing, but I liked to tweak all of these knobs. So my interests actually stemmed way back to those early years. And when I was in high school, I enjoyed science very much. I wasn't very good in English or history or any of the more social humanities types of disciplines, although today I wish I did have a more complete understanding of those disciplines, because they're really so important in a worldview. And I remember first studying about the atomic bomb when I was in high school, and I did a science project about it, and it won third place in the city. I didn't make any kind of model or anything, but I sort of talked about it, and I was the only kid in the entire City World's Fair, science fair, that had done this project. And so I got my first press exposure because a couple of the local journalists had called me up and said, "Oh, tell me about this atomic bomb, and what do you know about it?" And so it sort of really tweaked my interests, and it really became of interest to me when I realized that studying health physics and radiobiology was an opportunity to bring together physics, chemistry, math, and biology all into one. And I sort of was intrigued with the idea of bringing all of those disciplines together. Now, there was something that happened when I was in about 10th grade. A teacher of mine took me to her son's college graduation. And I had never been on a college campus before. And I was absolutely enamored with the tranquility, with the beauty of the campus. And I decided right then and there, even though I didn't know I was going to be a health physicist or a radiobiologist, those disciplines never even crossed my mind. I didn't even know that they existed. But right then and there, I knew I wanted to be an academician. I wanted to spend my life in higher education. I wanted to be a professor. I wanted to walk on college campuses. I wanted to have a quiet office where I could meet with students and just think about things. So that was an important turning point for me. And my ultimate goal, although it included health physics and radiobiology, really was to become a professor.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always been a primary love of mine, is to be a professor and do professorial type things and teach and be with students. And it's really been a most gratifying aspect of my professional career.
Well, it's obvious you reached that goal that you set for yourself at such an early age, and you've exceeded, I'm sure, your expectations in terms of.
Oh, far exceeded them.
Far exceeded expectations. So you had this early interest in the radiation field, understanding the atom, and when did the health part of the equation of the health physics, let's say, when did that kind of gel in your mind?
Well, actually, when I was an undergraduate, I took an undergraduate degree in biology at Wayne State University in Detroit, Michigan. And sometime in my sophomore or junior year, I can't say for sure, this would be about 1963 or 1962. No, sorry, 1966 or 1967. I read a little book by Erwin Schrödinger entitled What is Life?
Mm-hmm.
And I must admit, I didn't fully understand it then because I was really just a young student. But I was very much intrigued by what he had done in transporting quantum theory
right.
to the understanding of biology and the life sciences. I thought that was marvelous. I mean, that to me was the first bridge between physics and biology in a quantitative sense. I came to learn several years later that book was instrumental in many physicists crossing over into the biological sciences, and was a seminal book in the development decades later of the fields of molecular biology and molecular genetics, thinking of the idea that a mutation is not a continuum, but is a jump from some particular configuration in the DNA into a new stable configuration in the DNA, which was fundamentally different. So that's when I began to think about health implications of radiation exposure, because of course radiation was several decades earlier found to be an important mutagen. The early work of Hermann Muller, of course, in the late 1920s, which ultimately resulted in a Nobel Prize for him, was critical in identifying radiation as an important mutagen or agent that changes the genetic material.
So early in your career, you felt this connection between energy deposition, say, lost in the cell, and the constant, how the cell itself uses that energy.
That's right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
That's right.
Because that is, as you say, the whole fundamental of the whole practice of health physics and biophysics, really. So,
that's right.
It was, well, you've certainly proceeded in your career to follow just what you as a kid had in mind for yourself, which in itself is quite an accomplishment, you know.
Well, I mean, I also, during my undergraduate years, it became very interesting to me that, on the one hand, ionizing radiation can cause cancer, but it also can cure cancer. So this two-edged sword was a fascinating aspect to the problem, and it's only when I began to do my graduate studies did I fully begin to understand the explanation of the two-edged sword aspect of radiation action. But I very much wanted to study radiation health effects, and that's the reason why I ended up at the University of Tennessee for my graduate work, because the Oak Ridge National Laboratory by that time, and I'm talking now in the late 1960s, had already established itself internationally as an important center of biological research. There were the Leanne and Bill Russell, who had already established the Megamouse project to look at genetic effects. Dick Setlow was there looking at ultraviolet light and effects on cells and DNA, and began much of the work on DNA repair. I ended up working in the mammalian radiation recovery program under Arthur Kretschmar and Charlie Congdon and Lawton Smith, doing bone marrow transplantation and recovery of lethally irradiated mice. So I had the opportunity in graduate school at the University of Tennessee to work with some of the most outstanding biologists and physicists of the time to learn about effects of radiation, and it was a most memorable and joyous time of my life. I look back on it, it's now 30 years ago, with very, very fond memories.
Do you, with the recent announcement of the identification of the genetic code, let's say, how do you see that's going to impact on the whole practice of radiation assessment, that is, at the molecular level? Have you had time to think about that aspect of the problem? Because
well, I think that's a good question. The identification of the human genome, which at this point remains a daunting task. Essentially, what we've been able to do to this point is identify the letters in all of the sentences, but we don't know what all the letters mean.
Right. Yeah.
And we don't know what they mean in terms of diseases.
Right.
And obviously that's an important goal of characterizing the human genome, to try to understand what the genetic controls are for certain diseases, and how can we then subsequently interfere in a way to at least ameliorate the condition or perhaps even prevent it. In the radiation arena, what's really interesting is how can that help us identify biomarkers? Or
Sure.
how can that help us identify unique processes which occur in carcinogenesis as a result of radiation exposure? These are important questions. If we get the answers to these questions, they will help us very much elucidate what's going on at low levels of radiation exposure. And as you know, one of the great controversies in radiological health is the shape of the dose response curve, and what is the magnitude of the health risks at very, very small doses. So understanding what the nature of the and characterizing the genome may very well be able to help us answer these questions in the future. I would suspect that we're not looking at any concrete answers over the next few years. It may be a decade or more before we begin to get answers. I'm only speculating, but certainly what is currently going on in molecular genetics, molecular biology, will very much be able to shed light on this important problem.
So the people at the ORNL biology division have played a significant role in your career and interest in the whole field of radiation.
Oh, absolutely. Arthur Kretschmar was my PhD advisor, and he instilled in me the importance of careful data analysis, the importance of writing carefully, and I look very fondly upon the 3 or 4 years that I spent in his laboratory. As it turns out, I was his only PhD student. And you might think, well, gee, if you're the first PhD student, maybe he wouldn't be a very good mentor. On the other hand, I think looking back, he was extraordinary. There are a number of people, in fact, in my academic life that have played an important role. I can go back as far as high school. My old Latin teacher, Dorothy Hope, was a wonderful old lady, and in fact reminds me very much every time I look at a picture of Elda Anderson.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, she was just this wonderful woman who who instilled the love of knowledge and was just a delight to be around. She was a hard taskmaster, but at the end of the course, you just know that you knew something that you wouldn't have known had you not had her as a teacher. And you know, she passed away a number of years ago, but I remember her fondly, and all of my high school chums. We recently had a reunion a couple of years ago. We always speak fondly of Dorothy Hope. And then in college, Henry Hooper was my physics professor, and he instilled in me the importance of being enthusiastic as an instructor. And I hope that I'm enthusiastic as an instructor, because I think that that's a key to education.
Sure,
If an instructor is not enthusiastic about what it is that he or she is talking about, even though he may be an encyclopedia and know everything that there is to know, the opportunity to learn really isn't there. And teachers don't teach. Teachers really create an environment whereby students are able to learn. And being enthusiastic is a way of being able to do that. So Henry Hooper was very, very important to me in terms of instilling enthusiasm for teaching. In graduate school, of course, Arthur Kretschmar was an important instructor and mentor. Myron Fair, who, as you know, recently passed away, but was played a very important role in my early training in health physics, as did KZ Morgan, and the list goes on and on and on. I am delighted to say in front of you that you have played an extremely important role in my development as a health physicist. We've had two opportunities during my career in the early 80s and in the late 80s, when I have been on sabbatical leave from Georgetown University, to work with you, and the opportunities to work with a professional health physicist, a person who is who has the experience that you do, has been the experience has been immeasurable. And I don't mean to embarrass you, but I want to say that because it's important to me.
Well, that's kind of you, but this interview is of you, and I appreciate those comments, Ken. But never, but you bring to this whole profession, I think, an enthusiasm, which goes way beyond the teaching aspect and the educational, because I know from working with you that you have a great sensitivity for public issues regarding this whole question of radiation and radiation safety and the application of radiation. Like in molecular biology, where would we be without the ability to have radioisotopes in research and training? I know you have a great feel for that. That is certainly something you want to pursue to continue to pursue in your education and training of young students.
Oh yes, I after I got my PhD in 1973, I was appointed to the faculty at Georgetown University in Washington, where I was able to develop first my interest in radiobiology, and I had done some work with patients who were being treated for cancer with radiation, and I was particularly interested in problems that were associated with normal tissue responses, particularly in the head and neck region, and patients that received very high doses of radiation of the order of 70 gray. So we're talking about doses that are orders of magnitude higher than anything that we're concerned about in radiation protection. They would lose their taste, they would lose their capacity to make saliva, and they had a miserable existence, even though their tumors may very well have been cured. And this was an interesting problem to us, and some of my early research was, and I'm proud to say, we were one of the first groups to generate objective quantitative dose response curves for normal tissues in humans. We did this by serial sampling of salivary gland secretions and looking at gustatory responses, that is, taste responses in patients, and I enjoyed that immeasurably. And I worked on that problem for about 10 years. But during that period of time, I began to have even a greater interest in the low dose problem. So at the beginning of my research career, I was interested in high dose, but I recognized that really I felt that the real problems were at the low dose. And although we had an understanding about what the health effects of radiation were at low dose, some of the issues that were not fully explored but needed to be was, as you pointed out, policy, public relations. How do we get the public to understand what health effects are at low doses? Are they safe? What kind of message do we need to get across? And so I gradually merged into this particular area, and that's really what got me into health physics. So in the mid-1970s, towards the late 1970s, I made this transition from radiotherapy, radiobiology into health physics. And that's when I really became interested in the health physics profession. I sort of came late into the game, but I came with a perspective from not purely physics and instrumentation,
Sure.
but from the health effects side. I felt that this was an important issue because people who are exposed don't care about the dose. They don't care about what radionuclides are put into the environment. What they want to know, is it going to hurt me? And so those are the kinds of questions that I was focusing on. And as a consequence of my work in health physics, I started a graduate program at Georgetown University in the 1980s, in which we focused on health physics and medical physics and radiobiology. And I was fortunate during the 5 years that I headed that program. We got it to department status at Georgetown through some effort, but I had the support of a lot of people. We put out a good group of students. Some excellent people came through our program, like Rick Jones, who is now probably holds one of the highest civilian level health physics positions in the Department of Energy. Sean Guggens and Nancy Newman and Sean Austin at the NIH are examples of people who have gone through our program. Every one of our graduates have done very well. Those are just the names of people that come to mind who've really done our program proud and have, of course, done themselves proud. And they're outstanding in their own ways. They each have their individual strengths, and I'm proud of every one of those people.
Well, it's obvious you turned out some very fine students, and they certainly benefited from your own experience, and probably have a recognition that a lot of the research in molecular biology is dependent upon using radionuclides, and so that aspect of it seems to me to be lost sometimes. Now, I know you and I both were involved with the position statement of the society on the linear non-threshold, and it wouldn't be unfair to say that we've received a little criticism for that. But how do you feel that we've had the result of the health physics statement on the issue?
Well, just to give a little background, the position statements are generated by the Scientific and Public Issue Committee of the Society, and that committee is made up of past leaders and current leaders of the Society, and it was in fact during your tenure as the president, if I'm not mistaken, that we developed this position statement. I was the senior author of the position statement, which essentially said that we don't believe that below 10 rem, lifetime dose above natural background, that there should be quantitative estimation of risk, or 5 rem per year. And we based that on a careful review of the existing epidemiology, which in fact hasn't changed.
Right.
Our view hasn't really changed since the publication of that report. But we looked at the epidemiology and we said, well, in adult populations, there's just this large unknown at these small doses that are of concern to us in radiation protection, that we just cannot in any way accurately measure what the risk is, and is there any value in really trying to quantify risk?
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, that statement caused an uproar in certain segments of the radiation protection community, but I should also say it was embraced warmly by others. And I think the Health Physics Society, and I'm biased when I say this, I think the Health Physics Society has been looked upon in general in a favorable light, because it took an important step as an institution in trying to advance the debate on the low-level question. And I think you'll agree that other organizations have followed suit and have adopted our position in one form or another. So I'm certainly not in any way regretful that we went forward with it. On the contrary, I'm delighted that we were able to go forward with it. We went through a lot of drafts. We went through a lot of heartaches. You know it and I know it. But we got the position through, and I think it is as accurate now, as valuable now as it was when it was first released, I think in 1995 or 1996, something like that.
So you feel that today the statement is still relevant to...
I've not seen any epidemiological evidence that would suggest that it's been invalidated.
So this is one of the satisfying
Absolutely
things that you've accomplished in your life.
Yeah, I look back at
professional career.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I look back fondly on is, and I'm still interested in, is trying to advance the linear no threshold debate. I think I sometimes have been misinterpreted as someone who doesn't buy into the linear no threshold theory. That's really not the issue that I'm concerned about. It's whether we should use any theory. Yeah. Linearity, curvilinearity, hormesis down at small doses where we have no data. And you may remember a report that was written by Joyce Davis, who passed away a couple of years ago now, in which she talked about these estimates at very small doses as being speculates. And she was absolutely right.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. All we're doing at these very, very small doses is speculating. And we need to be careful in trying to determine risk estimates at these very small doses when there's very, very large uncertainties. And what does that mean? What does it mean when we tell a member of the public that the risk is 10 to the minus sixth at some very, very small dose? Is that a meaningful number when the bounds of uncertainty most assuredly include zero?
Yeah.
So it's a fundamental problem. So I think my contribution, your contribution, have been very, very important in advancing the debate, and I'm frankly very proud of it, even though we do have some detractors, but then that's okay. It makes for a healthy debate.
Well, I certainly obviously agree with you. I think we started something there, and you've taken a lot of heat from it, but you've withstood that heat, I think, with honesty and with integrity. And my own view is the society should be quite proud of your effort along that line. What do you see as some of the major issues that the profession is going to face in the future, let's say 10, 20 years from now? How do you think the profession will be? What will be the issues that you can see on the forefront?
Well, I don't have a crystal ball, and I can. It's really difficult to say, but what I see in my own environment in academia is that there's a real push to bring health physics and other kinds of safety professions like industrial hygiene together, so that health physics is not likely, at least in the kinds of occupational environments that I'm familiar with, is not likely to remain a standalone. It may very well be incorporated into a larger safety organization, which is fine. There are reasons for driving it in that way. The major driver being economics.
Sure.
I mean, in my own university, for instance, I'm at Arizona State University now, and have been there since 1990. I serve as the radiation safety officer. We have moved during the period of time that I've been at the university from a full-time radiation safety officer to a situation in which I serve as a part-time radiation safety officer, but also as a faculty member. So radiation safety is not a full-time occupation of a director in my institution. And I'm in the 4th largest public institution in the United States. We have over 100 Class 3B and 4 lasers in our that's monitored by my office. We have 40 or 50 research laboratories that use radioactive material. So we're not as big as some medical centers, certainly, but nonetheless, I have a small staff that takes care of these things. And so what we're looking at is a reconfiguration. And so what I think is going to happen is that radiological safety, health physics, may lose some of its visibility as a result of becoming more part of a larger safety kind of organization. I think that's what's happening. Another issue that I think is important is the question of molecular epidemiology, trying to understand some of the basic biological lesions and how do they translate ultimately to cancer and other health endpoints that are important to us in radiological health. Biomarkers, as we talked about before, I think is an interesting area of research. It has its problems. For instance, if you find a biomarker, how are you then going to be able to distinguish between exposure to natural background versus exposure to some particular occupational situation? That becomes problematic, certainly in trying to identify risk assessment in a particular occupational situation. So those are issues which are important. Certainly in the United States, we're all concerned about the large number of federal agencies that have radiological research and regulatory responsibilities. How can we bring these together in some way that it makes the regulatory system more comprehensive and more coherent and less conflicting? So these are issues which I think are really critical. I suppose if you were to ask me, is there something that I would want to do over again? Yeah, I would have liked to have been born 20 years ago so that I could have been involved in some of the health effects research that was going on during the time that you were in your early health physics career. I think the research, the biological research, understanding the gross health effects, we know it.
Yeah.
We have the basic instrumentation. So the fundamental research is done. There's some tweaking that we need to do, certainly. But the fundamental research that had gone on in the 50s, the 60s, and the 70s, essentially we've got the answers that we need.
So we don't need the big, large animal studies.
Well, I don't think that that they need to be supported to the extent that they were supported previously. Certainly, what human experiences we currently have, they need to be continued. There has been talk about truncating the Radiation Effects Research Foundation studies. I think that would be an absolute disaster if we were to do that. There's still so much more information that we can get, that we should continue to get that. It's a unique experience. Please God, we won't ever have an experience like that again. But we do have that database and we should continue to get it. Certainly the Russian legacy that we have is another opportunity. So there's some more research that we can do to refine risk estimates, but basically we know these risk estimates fairly well already. In fact, you and I think, sat down at one point and we looked at the risk estimates in the Beer 1 report, the Beer 3 report, the Beer 5 report, and there's not much difference between the central estimates in all three of those reports, although over that period of time, we're talking about 20 years of
20
additional
years,
data
yeah.
in the Radiation Effects Research Foundation. So basically, we've got the numbers. We know them fairly well.
So it's become more of a policy issue.
I think
now.
so.
Yeah.
I think how do we translate the science into the policy? And as you know, we recently had a conference about that at Airlie House in December, in which you participated, and a large number of other international experts participated, in which we tried to understand better how we can bridge science and policy. We didn't answer all the questions, but in my view, it was a step in the right direction to try to look at science and other factors that are important in the policy-making question.
And I think the important part of that was it was an international.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you brought in these the ICRP, the International Commission, and
IAEA.
the IAEA. So it's not anymore just the U.S. interest in this that benefits from this kind of thing, but these kind of conferences take on an international atmosphere. Do you have plans for follow-up conferences?
Well, we're in the early stages of thinking about a third conference. If we do have a third conference, I think that the topics would basically be of a policy nature and would not include very much science at all. Although there are still some significant scientific questions to be asked, in order to move the debate forward in a meaningful way in terms of how we can develop policy. We need to leave the scientific arena and more focus on what policymakers need to know, the process of policy making, regulatory decision making, etc. We're in the very, very early stages of even thinking about a third conference. I think all of us organizers are really interested in taking a bit of a break because we worked so hard on it. It must have been 2 years developing the Airlie House conference, and I think kind a few months, but we're thinking about it.
That conference and the one you held before that kind of thing seems to me to be one of the real standout things in what I consider a career of a health physicist, is one that you could be extremely proud of, and appear to still have the enthusiasm.
Oh, I'm enthusiastic about it, and I must admit that I've worked with some outstanding people, Gail DePlank and Manning Munsing and Sigurdur Magnusson and Ken Case and a number of other people, Jen Ressler. We all worked very, very hard and took time out from our busy careers to put this conference together. But the ultimate result of the conference, the impact that it's going to have, we really don't know at this point. But we certainly hope that that the participants will be able to take back to their own governments some of the ideas that we talked about, be able to implement them. Certainly one of the highlights of the conference was the realization that the United States has some unique problems. We're the only country that has a large number of federal agencies that operate essentially independently, and the lack of coherence in our regulatory program is something that's unique among the countries that were represented.
If you could move from being a past president of the Health Physics Society to being president of the United States, what would you do in that regard?
Oh God, I don't know how to answer that question. That's a blowout question.
What would you like to see happen on this whole regulatory?
Well, I'll be truthful with you, and I'm on the record, but I will be truthful with you. I have always been troubled by the fact that the United States has never been willing to bite the bullet on cigarette smoking and the public health hazards associated with cigarette smoking, we tend to worry about activities like small radiation exposures and things like that that have, in a relative sense, a minor impact on the public health compared to cigarette smoking. I would be perfectly happy to see our resources completely shifted over to trying to deal with the cigarette problem as a public health issue.
Sure.
I look at health physics, and I think you agree, as very much as a public health discipline.
Sure.
I'm interested in making the general public healthier, reducing cancer, reducing cardiovascular disease, things of that nature. And where should we be putting our emphasis? We should be putting our emphasis at things like cigarette smoking, where there are 400,000 deaths per year, roughly 250,000 heart disease deaths, 150,000 lung cancer deaths. That's where the impact ought to be. Now, how do we do that? Well, it obviously is problematic because you have tobacco farmers and you have other people that are making a living on cigarette smoking, and obviously one has to be cognizant of these kinds of things. But in a theoretical vein, I think we're really allocating resources in a most inefficient way. I think we need to reallocate resources, and if I was president of the United States, I would never get elected on this platform. Certainly, people in Kentucky and Tennessee and North Carolina would kick me out before the convention. I would very much want to see us do something about cigarette smoking.
Well, what do you've had such an illustrious career, Ken, in this business. If you had to pick out one contribution you think you've made, and you've made many, what would you like to see written on the tombstone?
Well, I mean,
not just in the sense of a technical thing, but
right.
in the whole question of this public, public health or the public interest that you have in mind.
Well, one of the things that I was most proud of during my presidential year, 1993, 1994, was the starting of the public relations program for the society. And we started with small steps, and the public relations program has evolved very nicely now, where you are actively involved in that, and the society now has an important presence on the Hill. I take great pride in at least having started that initiative.
Absolutely.
And I think it has served the profession well, because the profession is recognized as an expert body on radiation issues. Congressional staff and members know the Health Physics Society. They can go to experts on issues. I know of a number of society members that have testified before congressional committees, and that has provided me with a great deal of satisfaction. My work with the linear no threshold theory and that particular debate has also been most gratifying. I am now spending all of my scholarly time on that particular issue. I find it absolutely fascinating.
Good.
I'm just truly enjoying myself in that regard. I suppose you ask what ought to be on my tombstone. I guess if I can say that I was honest, I was a fair individual, and that I was a kind individual, and that I operated at, or I dealt with high morals and great concern for others. I would be very, very happy with that. And that was instilled by my parents. And that's something that I've always lived with. And although I sometimes get overly passionate and may raise my voice, really deep down I have a great respect for other people and their views, and I like to consider myself fair.
I think that's a very good appraisal. I would have appraised you in the same fashion, Ken.
Thank you, Bill.
It's been a real pleasure for me to, I don't know what you gained out of our association over these years, but I assure you I enjoyed them thoroughly, and and hold you as certainly one of the health physicists presidents, and it has contributed in more ways than even you probably know.
Well, thank you, Billy, and I must say that I hold very dear in my heart our association, which goes back more than 20 years.
Yes.
And I've learned a lot from you, and I often cherish my arguments with you. I think people tend to forget arguments. They look back at them as perhaps negatives, but on the contrary, with you, I think that we've learned from each other,
Yeah,
and we have mutual respect for one another, and I greatly appreciate and cherish our relationship.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Ken.
Thank you, Bill.
For that.